Now we turn to the next item on our agenda, a very exciting panel discussion on shaping the future of social enterprise in Ireland. As Minister Humphreys noted earlier, the social enterprise ecosystem in Ireland has seen dramatic and positive changes in recent years. There's been a groundswell of activity by social enterprises, by their networks and support organisations. More and more organisations are speaking about social enterprise and championing the cause. There really is a movement towards the development of this sector. Higher education institutions and researchers have been breaking incredible new ground and sharing their insights for the benefit of all. Investment in social enterprise has progressively increased by the state, and pilot programmes to educate young people on social enterprise, to develop social enterprises in rural areas, to advance higher level research or international collaborations have all been carried out with really positive results. The links between social enterprise, social innovation and social entrepreneurship continue to strengthen, as they rightly should, given the symbiosis between all three. We've seen a significant uptick in the localisation of social enterprise strategies, with the most recent, as the Minister said earlier, being published in Cavan just last week. We have advanced our considerations around issues related to legal form and opportunities associated with scaling social enterprises. Internationally, Irish social enterprises are punching way above their weight, with many awards being won. Our partnerships with international organisations have gone from strength to strength, particularly with the OECD, EU and other European social enterprise and circular economy networks. But we've also faced many serious challenges. The economic restrictions imposed on businesses in recent years were extremely difficult, in particular for social enterprises, and have been damaging. Access to mainstream business supports remains, it seems, a consistent challenge. The issue of insurance costs is crippling. Some would say it's the most significant challenge facing social enterprises today. Access to finance is still also a challenge, despite the excellent work of Social Finance Foundation, Cloncredo and Community Finance Ireland. And there are still those that do not fully appreciate the significance of this sector and its capacity to create jobs, generate significant economic activity, and contribute essential, impactful goods and services to our population, in particular the most marginalised or vulnerable in society. I say this not with a view to being comprehensive, but rather just to give a flavour of some of the successes and challenges we face together. The next session now is designed to be forward-looking and ambitious. For social enterprises to thrive, there's a need for us to reflect on the key catalysts for growth, both in terms of scale and impact, including the importance of a joined-up approach by government in partnership and amongst key stakeholders. As the Minister said earlier, we need to begin to co-create a vision for the future of social enterprise, which involves thinking big, but also thinking practically. And with that, I'd like to now introduce our very distinguished panel of speakers. I'm joined on the panel today by Clodagh O'Reilly, who's a board member of the Irish Social Enterprise Network, but also a well-respected academic researcher in the space of social enterprise and very well experienced in terms of managing social enterprises herself. So, Clodagh, you're very welcome. I'm also joined by Fergus Finlay, who many of you will know for his very long and distinguished career in the community sector. Fergus is here in his capacity as chairperson of Social Enterprise Republic of Ireland. Third on the panel, I have Elaine McGrath. Elaine, you're very welcome. Elaine is Economic Programmes Manager with Paul Partnership. And on the panel today, she's representing the Irish Local Development Network, a network of 49 companies that are actively supporting the development of social enterprise throughout Ireland. Then we have Ivan Cooper. Ivan, you're very welcome. The Director of Public Policy with The Wheel. And finally, but not least, we have Pauline Gannon, who's co-founder of Social Impact Ireland. You're all really most welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. Let me start the conversation, if I may, with you, Clodagh. A very general question, I suppose, to start us off. What's your opinion about the general health and the potential of social enterprise in Ireland at the moment?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us along. It's great to be here at a hybrid event. Really impressed by how it's going. Hopefully, everybody at home is enjoying the event. I think it's amazing where social enterprises have come from. I've been involved in social enterprises for a number of years, and I think it's a place to be really proud of how we've travelled the last number of years. Particularly, I suppose, over the course of the pandemic, social enterprises pivoted incredibly well from, changing to doing Meals on Wheels or, whatever was needed in the community. They were already had those relationships going. And it's not easy. You can't do that lightheartedly. And so I think that really showed the strength that social enterprises have. I suppose there's a tendency when you're so embedded in social enterprise to think that it's going amazingly and that it's going really well. And I think that we can't underestimate the challenge that we have for social enterprises in the road ahead in terms of the opportunities for public procurement, for employment, and so forth. So we've done really well over the last number of years, but there is a mountain to climb. And I think that the supports that we need are huge. And I think there's a great opportunity for social enterprises to show the rest of the world how business should be done. And everybody over the course of the pandemic has had a life crisis saying, what am I doing? Where am I spending my time? The world is at a climate crisis, and I think social enterprises have a phenomenal opportunity to set the course of how we're doing. And for me, I was really struck, I'm sure like many people, you were watching the All Blacks last week and the Social Enterprise Together Academy and the Wanderers, the adults that are trained in catering services with Down syndrome did the Haku, and I put up a tweet saying, gosh, this is so amazing. And the Innovate Academy just replied saying, work matters. And I thought, gosh, that really summarises what social enterprise is about, creating spaces where normal economic organisations won't necessarily step into. Social enterprises are there to show that actually this is viable, this is sustainable, this matters, and we have to do this for the road ahead, for the world that we want, for the future that's more inclusive. And I think that's great that we talk a lot about aspirational and innovation of how we want to change the world. And now we really have to step up our game. Yeah. I think the last policy has been great and brought us together and put social enterprise in the map. I think it hasn't gone far enough. There's so much to do. Where I would see that we're behind in many aspects in Europe. I don't think we can hold ourselves up as the pillar of social enterprise. Lots of things that we're doing can be, but there has to be, we have to work really hard to take advantage of making a better way for circular economy, making the road easier. I've worked in a social enterprise and know the challenges very well when you are looking ahead to what innovative practices you can put in place, but there's a leak or the shutter isn't working. And so you have to go downstairs and Google how to figure out how to do that. And so there's a lot of work to be done for social enterprises. But what we do see, and I think what the pandemic has paved the way for huge collaboration. And we've learnt so much from the world around us. And now we have the Social Economy Action Plan coming that'll be launched on the 16th of December. And that gives me great hope that we start to work in collaboration, because we have to start scaling social enterprises to really answer the issues that society is facing. And then hold us up as a demonstration for the rest of society that this is how you do it. We've done the groundwork, and now let's all move ahead together.
Clodagh, yeah, great. And you brought in a lot of interesting points there. The action plan you mentioned is the EU action plan on social economy, just for any of the participants who may not be aware with that. Can I build on what you've just said, Clodagh, and ask Fergus? Fergus, from your perspective, what's your opinion about the current state of the social enterprise sector? Would you agree with Clodagh? And what would you what would your vision be for the future of social enterprise in the country?
Well, first of all, I would agree with Clodagh to a very considerable extent. But I want the funny thing about today, and it's a brilliant conference, and I've already learned a lot. Today's the first time I ever met Clodagh, and that's not good. My fault, not Clodagh's fault, but that's not good. And it's part of what I think we need to think about. spent my entire working life in the community and voluntary sector, and I've also spent my entire adult life as part of the disability movement. Now, I use those two words, sector and movement, for a particular reason. We're not a sector, we're not a movement, not yet. We're social enterprises. SERI has a practitioner council, and that has enabled me to meet and learn from a lot of people who are doing the work on the ground. And what that has taught me is that the social enterprises have unlimited potential, absolutely unlimited potential, especially in the world that Claude has described that we live in now, where we're all much more interested in knowing the carbon footprint of what we buy and the services we use. We're all much more interested in buying local, manufacturing local, delivering local, growing local, and so on. And the scope and potential for all sorts of social enterprises is unlimited in that regard. I chair a social enterprise in Bray that's run for and by people with intellectual disabilities. And the potential for that kind of activity is, I think, almost beyond measuring. One of the limiting things is the absence of that word, sector and movement. We're not either of them. Social enterprise can be a very lonely place to be. You talk to people who are involved in working and running social enterprises, and they all say the same thing, that they feel a bit out there on their own. At national level, there are several of us who are involved in trying to represent social enterprise, and we're a bit fractured. You know, we don't talk to each other the way we should talk to each other. We don't devote as much emotional energy as we need to. It's not that I ever believed that the department should be the enemy, but public policy should be our target, our joint shared target. We should be heavily impressing on you and on the department and on government the role we can play, the potential that we have, and so on. I work with Ivan in a different group about the relationship between aspects of the community and voluntary sector and the HSE. And Ivan makes the point again and again and again at those meetings, and it's a profoundly important point. 2 points he makes. One is about the nature of the relationship, that we think of it as equal, but it isn't. You know, there are big funders, and then there are organisations receiving the funding, and it's very difficult to, you know, influence policy when when that relationship is always in the back of your head. The way to address that power imbalance, I think power imbalance is the phrase Ivan uses, is for us to be much more cohesive. So power, influence, effectiveness at a policy level comes from identity. It comes from a feeling of shared value, shared purpose, shared vision. We all have the same vision. We don't all necessarily share it the way we need to share it all the time. And I think there have been efforts. I don't think they've worked as well as they should have. When I became chair of SERI, one of the things I said I wanted to do was to devote all our emotional energy outward, not inward. To build fences where they need to be, mend, repair bridges, etc., etc. I really, really want to work with everyone in the sector for the common purpose of building influence and effectiveness in order to unleash potential, because the potential is unimaginable.
I think that's a really important point, Fergus, and I think it's really music to everyone's ears as well. I think we're clearly all on the same page that working together is critical. And I agree with you, by the way. Not that we're the enemy, but certainly that we are in public policy should be, of course, your interlocutor when it comes to advancing the sector. Elaine, can I go to you, and just building on what you've heard, and I'd like to just hear a little bit more about your perspectives around the value and the impact of social enterprise when it comes to the communities that particularly local development companies work with.
Yeah, so I suppose, and that's it. Paul Partnership is the local development company in Limerick City, which is a significant, I suppose, urban partnership with huge disadvantage. And then if you look at that, the whole point of social enterprise in those communities is that that's an example of most of the social enterprises are based in very disadvantaged communities. And they are a vital part of that community for the well-being, the maintenance and the growth of that community. And that's really important. And we do that in an urban context, but local development companies right throughout Ireland do that, work in that what we'd call demand-efficient environment for social enterprise to deliver. activity in their communities. And that demand deficiency might be due to low population in a very rural dispersed area in West Connemara or North Donegal or wherever, or it could be in the inner city of Limerick or Dublin, where the demand deficiency is because of, I suppose, the buying power of some people. It's down to simple as that. Or because the very service that you need is not a commercial service, but a social service as well as an enterprise. And they have to complement each other. And very much social enterprise, both words are equally important in that title. They are not enterprises in their own right. They're enterprises to serve the social need in that community, whatever community they serve. And that is absolutely vital. And I think it's key that that the proper supports are put in place to support those social enterprises, to exist, grow where possible, but also to acknowledge that the vital services that can't grow are equally important in that community. I think we have seen this throughout Ireland in the pandemic. The role that social enterprises have played in addressing food poverty in particular during the pandemic is significant. And I'd say we'll never be able to quantify it because, unfortunately, most social enterprises are focused on the delivery of their service rather than measuring the impact. And the level of multiplier effect of social enterprises in their communities is significant. Local enterprise, I suppose, local development companies then, like ourselves and Paul Partnerships and others, we work with those social enterprises to make sure that they are viable in the context of key aspects of their business. So we go right through the life cycle of a community group who says, we need to make a few pounds and how can we do it and what service can we offer because we've something we want to do socially, right from that idea generation to the social enterprise who starts out with just Meals on Wheels and now says, well, how do we scale to do the community cafe that's complementary, or how do we scale to do the hairdressers, because the elderly want a hairdresser in their community and it doesn't exist in a rural area anymore, and you can do it. So we do all the little pieces that are there in the business side of things. Yeah. But we're also now, as local development companies, very conscious of the need to support social enterprises to do the social impact. In Limerick, we've just done a piece where we're taking on, we're working with, it was formerly LIT, but it's now called TUS, in doing an actual piece of work around developing a toolkit around measuring impact and measuring impact in that very local context of your community in your area. And it's vital. And that's something, I suppose, that's really valuable locally to us in Limerick, but is also really vital in the context of the ILDN. We have a national network of over 80 officers who work in the local development companies, all with a remit to work in their own locality. But we come together a number of times in the year to network, share best practice, share the resources we're developing. So that whole piece around collaboration and developing the sector, even though I do, and I know it's not a formalised sector and I'm not arguing with Fergus on that, but developing that whole thing of we're doing really good work here, and then we have the opportunity to regionally share that, particularly through the SERP projects at the moment as well, because that has a regional context.
Elaine, you touched on so many important points there, but one of them that I would draw out was this emphasis you gave to the social and the enterprise being equally important. I think that's a critically important point. We had a contributor at the conference last year, John Evoy from Grow Remote, who said something that's burnt into my mind. He said, it's really important not to build poverty into your business model. So I think what you talked about there, about that importance of the business supports and so on, is really a critical one. But you also talked about the response to COVID and the food poverty and so on. And I'd like to bring in Ivan on this point, because of course the wheel really led the charge, Ivan, I think it's fair to say, around helping government to develop schemes and supports that would respond to the crisis. So from your perspective, I mean, how have you seen social enterprise, respond through the course of COVID? And more generally, what are your observations about to go back to the question I asked Clodagh about the health of the social enterprise sector, let's use that word for now, in Ireland?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And just again, agreeing with all of the contributions just made so far, really rich. showing the range and the relevance of social enterprise and just so many facets of Irish and global life. So I mean, our view in the Wheel is that really, social enterprise, the moment has come. Okay, it's as simple as that. It's a key role in the great global challenges of our time. It's transitioning to a more sustainable and inclusive developmental model in relation to how we do things, how we make things, how we support one another. It's a really profound moment of change, I think, that's coming, and social enterprise are going to be in the vanguard of it, and we've got to make the necessary investments to enable that to happen. You think of these huge societal and economic challenges, the digitalization challenge, we've already heard, the circular economy, the sustainability challenge, the green transition and the just transition challenge, the rural connectivity challenge. I could go on. We could list another 10 or 15 of those challenges. And at the front of them all, there is this, crucial role. We've already heard it of the social economy. In particular, Minister Humphreys acknowledged it this morning. The social enterprises, they're empowering to the way we do things is changing and needs to change. And it's understood that change is kind of there. In a way, I think social enterprise can model for commercial enterprise the way forward. That's the level of the profundity here. So we have a huge responsibility. A way of understanding it, we need to move, I've written it down here because I wanted to get it right for myself, from a social and economic model that rewards the individual at the expense of society to one that puts the community at the heart and fosters our responsibility to each other and to our communities. And we're going to be doing and publishing some thinking about this in the Wheel in the very near future. And the social economy way of doing business, promotes the common good, that idea, and really is an antidote, is what makes it different and so important as the needed new way of doing things. So, that's essentially where we're coming from. There's traditionally understood in Ireland, we had a more loosely understood community and voluntary sector, social enterprise emerging now very much as part of that, okay? And to echo the point made by Fergus, we're very much absolutely committed, as we did. You mentioned, for example, the response to COVID, community call, working with the department to generate the concepts there, working with colleagues like Irish Rural Link and others in relation to bringing the sector together to work with the state in that. And also, of course, the Stability Fund for charities. And many social enterprises are, of course, charities as well. And that was hats off to the department for responding to that. That was basically a 50 million euro cash injection into the health of social enterprises and community and voluntary organisations generally. And over 600 organisations applied for and benefited from that funding. So it was absolutely essential. Key point being, though, it wasn't just the Wheel that secured that outcome. It was a coalition of organisations in the sector that came together. And that's echoing Fergus's point. Our strength is very much our collaborative power. Yeah. And I suppose, I'll finish with this. We're all mission-led. Social enterprises are mission-led. The mission comes first. It's not about competition. Yeah. Funding systems can be set up that cause unnecessary competition, but the impetus has always to be to collaborate. So we'll certainly be looking to work very closely with CIRI, with ILDN, and with ISEN here today. And I'd like to congratulate the department for, I think, bringing this interesting panel together and supporting us to work more effectively together.
Thanks, Ivan. Very, very much appreciate your inputs there. And I think you emphasised there this whole idea of business for social good and, the potential for social enterprise to actually influence the broader corporate commercial sector. And I think that's a really nice moment to bring you in, Pauline, because of course Social Impact Ireland has a remit that is social enterprise focused, but also impact focused beyond the social enterprise sector. So I suppose just to ask you, Pauline, all your insights around the state of social enterprises would be very, very useful to hear, but also to hear from you, are we communicating and measuring the impact of social enterprises sufficiently well, do you think? Or what more could be done, do you think, in that regard?
So can I just first say that when you hear the other speakers and you can hear the passion and you can hear the dedication and you can, as I think Fergal and others have said, we're all in this for the same reason. We all want the same thing. I suppose from a Social Impact Ireland perspective, we're on a mission. Our mission is really to put impact to the heart of all business models, whether it's a commercial business model or social enterprise business model. there's one other point I want to make first, though. We have the community sector. We've many sectors is the wrong word, Fergus, but we've many groups within the social enterprise space, and we'll have heard everybody talk about that. One of the groups, though, that I want to highlight are those that have the high potential startup for growth within the social enterprise space that go beyond maybe the voluntary and the community space. And I think that's something that's really important to highlight because it is linked with impact. That's one point I want to make. The other point is when we talk about impact, I inherently believe that impact should be at the heart of all business models. I think whether you're a high potential startup with Enterprise Ireland or you're an organisation within the Wheel or you're a social enterprise under another support system, I think we all should start talking and having a conversation around impact. What is the impact of what you do? Now, when it comes to having that conversation, we have a problem in Ireland at the moment. We have a problem around people, the understanding about what does that mean? What does impact mean? How do you articulate it? How do you measure it? What if you can't measure it? There's a great quote, if I get this right now, and that is, not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters. And I think one of the gaps that we've seen over the last 2 years in Social Impact Ireland is lack of understanding around what impact means, lack of understanding on how to evaluate it, measure it and articulate it, lack of skills and competency within the individual and the enterprises to do that. We also have a huge gap on people that can articulate, measure or pull together their impact in an impact report. Then they struggle with the audience. What audience does it communicate to? How do you communicate to all the different audiences? So when we look at how far we have come, and nobody can argue that we have come huge steps in the last 3 years. I think COVID has helped with that. But if we stop now and look into the future, what do we want from the social enterprise space in the future? And from my perspective, we want every business, every organisation, community, voluntary, enterprise, no matter where you're coming from, we want all of you to think about what is the impact? What's the impact that you're aiming to achieve? What's the impact that you want to grow and scale? What's the impact of the business that you have and the business decisions that you make? Your strategy has to be an impact-driven strategy. The decisions that you make as a leader has to be impact-driven. I think we have a whole generation that's coming up behind us. They're almost pushing at the gate to push through it. They're demanding change. They're ready for change. They're ready for involvement in all of our organisations. They're looking for this. That brings me to then, where are the pathways? It's not always about starting a social enterprise. It's not always about starting an organisation. We had a vacancy recently. We had over 40 applicants from a variety, like really experienced backgrounds, banking, financial services, retail, a whole host of backgrounds. And the one thing they were all looking for was a pathway into an impact-driven environment in a way that they feel they could serve their community and their own environment with their skills. And I think that pathway is what's important, paralleled with the impact, paralleled with the mission, the vision, and also the business model that's at the heart of it.
Thanks, Pauline. And I think that you're... Sorry, Fergus, go ahead, yeah.
I mean, I was really struck by what Pauline said. And I think it's important to just kind of emphasise, all of us in our own way can have an impact.
Yeah.
Working together, we don't just double the impact, we multiply the impact. And it's that sense, like, we talk, I'm trying to avoid using the word sector because I want us to be a sector, to become a sector. I think we're all in this space now. It's much easier for many social enterprises to measure their impact, although very often the impact is less tangible. It's not measured in widgets, it's not measured in pounds, shillings and pence. It's often measured in mental health, in emotional strength and resilience among the people involved and the people who are being served, etc. But if we could work better together, you're about to launch a tender around data gathering and census gathering and so on. And I would certainly hope that one of the purposes of that would be a way of beginning to measure our collective impact and how we can increase that. There've been exercises like this in the past which have demonstrated. I wouldn't be very familiar with, those around the economic impact of charities and the contribution they make to the greater economy and so on. The collective impact is potentially enormous. Enormous in terms of change, enormous in terms of economic development, but also enormous in terms of meeting all the sustainability targets.
Yeah.
Everything we want to do in Ireland that is sustainable depends, I think, on social enterprise, and depends on it being better, bigger, more efficient, more accountable, more transparent, and more cohesive.
And certainly from our point of view, we see this data collection exercise as a very important piece of a puzzle
huge
that's
stepping
eluded us for a long time, frankly, because we're not in a position to say exactly how big, how deep social enterprise runs throughout communities throughout the country. A point, I don't want to open a conversation on it, but just a point on the issue of sector, not sector. It is interesting to note that at the EU level, social economy is recognised as an ecosystem, one of the 14 industrial ecosystems. I think that's quite useful to bear in mind. It's also useful when it comes to our thinking around business supports and so on. And actually, Claude, I want to come back to you on something that Pauline mentioned there. She talked about high potential startups. How do we scale up social enterprises? What needs to be done? Because there are social enterprises at this meeting now who are at very different levels. Some are very local, small scale. Others are at the cusp of something very, very significant and very big and have ambitions to scale. What would you say to them? What are the ways forward in terms of scaling?
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I'm focused on in my own, professional capacity now with the PhD. I think there has been tremendous supports for social enterprises that are starting up. There's lots of impact accelerator programs. I've been on quite a good few of them. I think there needs to be a greater understanding of social enterprises and specific to their sector. And I think, or their area of expertise. And we see that in the reuse area, that organisations like the Community Reuse Network are doing amazing work in helping organisations to scale up specifically around their needs. And I think the business supports that are needed, there's broad business supports, but there's also very specific ones. If you're running a social enterprise that is a WISE, or if you're running a social enterprise that's working in a completely different sector, they need different supports, and I think we have to start offering really tailored supports that aren't tied to funders, that are independent and accessible to social enterprises in order for them to scale up. Not, as the guys were saying earlier, not every social enterprise should scale up, but the ones that are there, there needs to be the support. I know that Thriftify spent a year trying to sort out their challenges with legal issues or with their legal framework before they were able to scale up. I mean, if we have social enterprises that are able and ready to scale up and they can't because there's restrictions around where they're going, we really need to sort that out. And so the business supports that need to be in place are given from organisations that really understand an organisation where the social mission and the economic mission are of equal importance, and one does not work without the other, and that they're tailored specifically to the social enterprise. We see there's a huge talent war everywhere going on in all sectors, in private, public, and social enterprise won't be unaffected by that. And we have to be able to pay employees much better. And so that ties into that scaling process as well.
Thanks, Clodagh. I just want to note for our participants that we are at 12 o'clock, but I think you'll agree that this is a fascinating discussion that shouldn't be abruptly interrupted. So I'd propose to continue for at least another 6 minutes or so before we go to summing up, if that's okay. So, Elaine, can I just build on the point that Clodagh made there? She talks about the idea of scaling up and so on, and it's not for all organisations. I'd like to hear from you a little bit about how do we encourage the social enterprise business model amongst marginalised groups? How do we use social enterprise to bring those that are on the fringes, back into the workforce, long-term unemployed or minority groups or whatever? Do you have thoughts on that? What can be done in that regard?
So I guess a huge number of the social enterprises that would be supported through the local development network are organisations who provide a lot of support and employment opportunities for people who would otherwise maybe have experienced long-term unemployment or come from the numerous different target groups we talk about when we talk about social inclusion. And I suppose two things I would say, supports like the SICAP programme, the Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme, and LEADER those social inclusion, rural development programmes all have stitched into them the whole idea of social enterprise and supporting social enterprise, because they're seen as a significant avenue to bring people, as you mentioned, who are in the fringes back into that environment, particularly around employment opportunities. A lot of the active labour market programmes would be the employees of social enterprises or would be working in those social enterprises. And there's excellent examples of those right throughout the country, of social enterprises that offer employment opportunities to people who maybe come from the wrong part of town with the wrong address, who can bring work experience into their job description and their CV that they may not otherwise get, who maybe have a past that you know they want to leave behind as ex-offenders, who won't get, despite the education opportunities they've taken on and despite progressing themselves in lots of areas, the lack of work experience can be very challenging a lot of the time. So social enterprises provide, you know, a huge amount of employment opportunities to people who would otherwise may not be able to come back to the workforce. And it also offers opportunities to people who maybe find themselves in rural areas where the RSS scheme, where they need employment, but there's no employment in the area, and for different challenging reasons, they may not be able to travel to the centre where employment opportunities are available. So I think that's vital. Just in the context of the scaling piece, that some, as I mentioned at the outset, some of the social enterprises are demand efficient, but then others look at models around where they might actually scale the business to get economies of scale. So you'll see examples of a childcare facility in south side of Dublin where three community creches came together to create one business to run the three of them, so that they managed one board managing it, and the resources and the HR and the management. So there's opportunities around scale that way as well. Not everything has to be grow your existing business to be bigger. Yeah. It can be different models of that. Yeah. And it can be where the scale is that it's not, maybe you don't grow your own business, but you support the community down the road to replicate your business model. And that's a scale version of things as well, that we would very much, I suppose, in that local context, the sharing of experience and abilities. And like in Limerick City where we work, there's 5-6 different community hubs that all do community cafes, Meals on Wheels, etc. They're all equally vital in their communities, but because we have a network in the city, they also share their experience. So when the Stability Fund came out, we had a network meeting. The whole focus was on, where did you find your hand sanitizer? Vital piece of information in a very short time space. Yeah. So that whole idea of networking as well helps the scaling of business.
And actually, I think, we're talking here about clustering as well, really. I mean, and clustering is becoming a more and more focus of public policy. On a national level, there's a new national clustering policy that's being developed at the moment. Ivan, can I just ask you your views on that in relation to like the importance of clustering, of networks and supports and so on? What are your views around that?
Yeah, I think it's really more important than ever. Just picking up on one of the points there just made, just in relation by Elaine, in relation to the deficient demand organisations and how important it is to keep a focus on that as social enterprise develops. So traditionally, kind of social enterprises, their role was to repair society, if you see, but it's kind of shifting now into much more of a developmental role, enabling us once again to respond to these huge challenges. But we need to make sure that the deficient demand piece is kept in focus, and that there's no move towards possible circumstances where organisations that feel that they can't, so to speak, pay their way through earning a contribution, don't pay a price by being unable to participate in the move towards social enterprise. So we really need to keep a strong spotlight on that. In terms of networking and connectedness, we have a number of networks here today present. There's really good quality networking, I think, now in place for social enterprises. And again, coming back to Fergus's point, I think the challenge is to bring those networks together, to get them talking to one another, to enable that cross-pollination of ideas to be maintained. Yeah. And then, just in relation to where networks go or what's possible for them, I think in the future, we have the new European Action Plan coming out. The social economy, we need to bring that concept back in, really mainstream it here in Ireland. The social economy concept to connect up the networks we have domestically here with the European level networks as well. Because the focus there is on this, I think, kind of almost more ambitious idea of social economy, and we have our social enterprise and our community and voluntary sector. We need to break down the divisions between them too, because we really are all coming from the same place. It's mission focused, and it's reinvesting the surplus back into the services. And my final point would be, it is kind of magical to reflect on it. Social enterprises, it puts the mission and the public benefit first, I've noted here. And for some social enterprises, the public benefit is in the service of the product they deliver. For others, it's achieved by employing people or training people who are distant from the labour market. And then for others, yet again, it's about using the surplus from the business to reinvest in public mission focused. So there's lots of different ways it can be done, and it's a fundamental shift into a new way of doing things, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Ivan. I'm going to give the last question to Pauline, but you're not off the hook yet, because I'm going to come around to each panellist in a moment and ask you, if you had a magic wand, or rather in the new policy, what is the one key issue, the key nut that needs to be cracked? What needs to be focused on in the new policy? Just one word, one sentence. But the first thing I'm going to do is come to Pauline. Pauline, we're coming into Christmas period. So clearly this should be a really opportune time for social enterprises to be selling their stuff, doing their thing, as it were. How do you see market development in terms of social enterprise? Is that bisocial movement internationally, is that something that we should be pursuing in Ireland, do you think? Or what more can be done by social enterprises to market their wares, as it were?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I definitely think, in theory, people are ready for the bisocial movement. I think in theory, people want to know where their products are coming from. I think the reality of that, though, brings many complexities that we haven't quite got a handle on here in Ireland. So I think it needs a lot more work to develop how do we identify those wares, and how do we identify that bisocial movement, and how do we tap into where our money is going, what we're buying, what services, what products we're buying. And I think that comes back then from a social enterprise perspective. How did they reach the public? How did they step out from the crowd? How did they step forward? But I think there's another thing parallel to that, which is when you look at selling a product or selling a service, you're looking at the enterprise part of the social enterprise. And we've talked a lot here about, the community voluntary sector. We've talked a lot about impact. We've talked a lot about some of the other hot topics. But if we were to take a moment, and this links into the Christmas idea, if we take a moment to concentrate on the enterprise part. We talk about the circular social economy, and we talk about the contribution for social enterprise towards that. And I think none of us can argue that that's an important element of moving forward in a post-COVID world. If you look at the work that Claude is doing in particular for a moment, and you look at the scaling of social enterprises, well, in order to scale a social enterprise, you have to really focus on the enterprise part of it as well as the impact part of it. So if you focus on that, and you look at what are we doing here in Ireland? What message are we sending out to social enterprises? We don't provide seed capital, but we do on the commercial side. What message are we sending to those social enterprises? I've heard Clodagh speak before. She talks about the importance of you set out to scale. To really scale properly, you set out to scale. So that means you start with scaling in mind. But I suppose I want to make the point that for any social enterprise to sell their wares, the products or the services, whether it's the Christmas market or any other market, there needs to be more support on the enterprise side of their social enterprise. We have to look at seed capital. We have to separate out that cohort from the social enterprise sector. We have to elevate it up. We have to give them equal access to business supports, the same as what you would get on the commercial side. We have to learn from what they're doing in Scotland. €1,500 to give a seed capital for a social enterprise to develop an idea, look at the impact, look at that, how they scale that impact. That's value for money. That produces then scalable social enterprises that can contribute towards the circular social economy and benefit all the work that we talk about today.
So much, Pauline, so much there that we can get into. We could spend the afternoon speaking, but I am going to have to wrap it up. So I want to just go to you all. Magic wand, if you could change one thing, or if you've one word of advice for the department as we look forward, it's still a year in the future to developing the new policy, what would it be? What's your advice? Clodagh, first you, please.
Well, Andrew, when you're designing the new policy, I would like you to put the following in place. I think we need to invest in shared services for social enterprises. Organisations like We Make Good are supplementing the work of social enterprises to help them elevate their marketing, all that, the stuff that they don't have time to do. And I think we need to invest in so that a social enterprise can access marketing, finance together, IT, all those kind of services that they need in order to elevate their business so they can attract more investment.
Great. Thanks, Clodagh. Fergus.
Work with us, Andrew. Insist that we work with you. You're writing the policy, and the policy is the thing on which you'll be judged and the department will be judged. Insist that we make a contribution as a sector to that policy. Don't ask me to come to a meeting, ask me and Clodagh to come to a meeting together. Insist that we have a real input, a meaningful input, and one that is as much about what we can do for public policy as what public policy can do for us. I'd love the startup grants, I'd love the administrative backup, I'd love all of that. But you need, public policy needs to find a way to tap into the creativity, the skill, the passion, the commitment that is in social enterprise. So making that marriage is one that can only happen by, all of us kind of being there together.
Great. Thanks, Fergus. Elaine.
Oh, Lord. Just one?
Just one.
Okay. I suppose for me, social enterprise is about recognising what viability and sustainability means to a social enterprise and having all the pieces in place that will support those local organisations and entities to be viable, not in the commercial sense, but in the sense of recognising social and enterprise.
Great. Thanks, Elaine. Ivan.
I have 24, but I'll stick to one, okay? And the one is...
never read you, he'd only read you one page letter at the time. When he's too busy to do that, he'd write you a 14-page letter.
That's true. Okay, the one, I would insist that the state's general, let's say, support services for SMEs are available to all social enterprises. So there's a job for Enterprise Ireland there, for the Department of Enterprise and for others. We simply need social enterprises to be treated equitably as profit-making enterprises. Simple as that. So there's one to insist on.
That's been loud and clear today, I think. Thank you, Ivan. Pauline, final word, and we're going to wrap up.
Ivan, you just took my final word. Can I have it back? Actually, just to add, I totally agree. I agree. I think that this department needs to work with the Department of Enterprise. I think we need to see cohesion. We need to highlight the enterprise. I have one last thing to say, though, and I mean this genuinely. In the next policy, we need to keep the value of everyone here, the value of all the elements of the work that we do. We need to keep all of that work valued at the heart of the new policy and at the heart of the post-COVID world that we're coming into. I think that's the most important thing. I think all the other elements of it then build on from that, and that we keep that common goal common between all of us, that we all come together, we find the middle ground, even if we slightly disagree on certain aspects of it, and we just plough ahead into the same direction, into a post-COVID world that's equal for everybody.
Wow. Yeah. What a powerful message of cohesion. And let me just say from the department's point of view, partnership has been the linchpin of our work on social enterprise and will remain as such as we go forward. Colleagues tuned in, I apologise again for the delay, but I hope you agree it was worth continuing that discussion. Thank you all sincerely for your incredibly useful and interesting contributions, and we look forward to working with you in the course of the next year and in developing the new policy.